To those viewing us on YouTube. This is OLLI at George Mason. We are streaming the impeachment of Andrew Johnson with our speaker, Heather Dudley. If you would like to learn more about OLLI, please visit us at our website, olli@gmu.edu. Please go ahead, Heather.
Hello, welcome everybody. I am so excited to be here with you again for this 4-session course on the impeachment of Andrew Johnson. Well, I mean, I got to start off by saying that last fall, when I first started putting this class together, nobody in their right mind would have predicted that impeachment would be back to front page news in January of 2021. I don't know about you, but I just can't keep up right now with everything in the news about impeachment. So obviously, as we are moving through this class, we're not going to be ignoring the 500-pound gorilla in the room, in that we are right in the middle of an unprecedented impeachment, second impeachment of Donald Trump, where we are looking again at some really important questions about impeachment here. So I plan on stopping, hopefully, you know, a number of times through this presentation, and there are some natural pauses where I can take questions, hear your comments. It's certainly been my experience that the OLLI members are some of the most well-informed, well-educated people I know. And so I am very excited to hear what you have to say about this very murky issue of impeachment, and it seems to be getting murkier every day. So anyway, my goal for this class is really twofold. One, I am interested in delving into this period right at the end of the Civil War, the years of the presidency of Andrew Johnson. You know, for many of us, we know a little about the Civil War, and lots of folks know a lot about the Civil War. And then you get to Appomattox, you get to the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and then the curtain comes down. And very little is known of this period. And that's really a shame, because it's during these first years after the end of the Civil War that our nation grapples with two really important questions, problems that have continued to vex our nation right up until today. One is the issue of racism, this very profound racism that had underpinned and justified slavery. And then, of course, that's an issue that continues right up till today, doesn't it? With the Black Lives Matter movement. Just yesterday, President Biden made a speech that was addressing the issue of racial justice. And then, of course, the issue of states' rights. The issue of, well, what kind of problems are best dealt with in the federal government, and what kinds of problems must be left to the states? And that's a very vexing question. I think it's still a problem that we're looking at today, isn't it? With the problem with the distribution of vaccines. I think one of the issues there is federal versus state sovereignty. And when we look at how those issues were dealt with during Andrew Johnson's presidency, the stage was really set here for, I think, frankly, how poorly we were able to deal with those issues at that time and over the next century and on. So my other goal, obviously, was to look at this issue of impeachment and to use the impeachment of Andrew Johnson, that was the first impeachment of a president, to use it as a springboard to delve into this very complicated issue of impeachment. I'm going to start with the Constitution, and obviously any constitutional question, we need to go to the framers and try to figure out what on earth they meant when they put impeachment into the Constitution. And then, you know, we'll look at some of the early applications of impeachment, and then move on and study impeachment of Andrew Johnson. You know, impeachment has been, it's been historically rare. I think we have, well, when I'm talking about impeachment, I will generally include Richard Nixon, because his impeachment train was down the track before he resigned.
Yeah, I only do one train.
We have 3 presidents who've been impeached, 1 senator, 1 cabinet officer, and 15 judges. Most often, folks, if they're going to be facing impeachment, resign before they are going to undergo impeachment. So it's been very rare. And for that reason, we have very little precedent going. Of course, when we talk about it being very rare, this is a very important question. We go for almost 200 years, and we have just 1 president impeached. And then in, say, almost 50 years, we have had, well, three impeachments. And again, I'm including Nixon here. Nixon, Clinton, and now Donald Trump facing his 2nd impeachment. That's an important question, isn't it? I mean, why is it that suddenly it seems to be accelerating? Could be that we just feel more ready to use this tool. It could be that we're just getting more scoundrels lifted into the presidency. You know, the founders, they gave us that fail-safe system, the Electoral College. That was going to be our way of being quite certain that only the best men would be lifted into the presidency. And just in case we managed to lift a bad man into the presidency, or if a good man turned bad while in the presidency, there was going to be that impeachment there. And so why we're using it with greater frequency, I don't know. So anyway, let's go, and we're going to look here at the so let me see. You know, Meg, I don't know why is my screen frozen. There it is. It's not frozen. Okay. So we're looking here at impeachment in the Constitution. And what I'm going to do is we're going to look at the words in the Constitution, and then we're going to look at what has become normative practice, what people expect it to happen here. The first time impeachment is mentioned here is in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5, where the House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachments. Now, the framers, when they structured Congress into these 2 houses, the framers had really a different view about the differences between the House and the Senate. The representatives in the House, they were the only ones who had direct contact with the people. Only the House of Representatives were directly elected by the people within the states. For that reason, they had to go back every 2 years, and they had to check in with the people. And the people could register their pleasure or displeasure with how the representatives have been representing them. Because they had a direct contact with the people, that they would be the ones who could be most immediately expressing the will of the people. So if the people within the states looked at the president and were displeased with his behavior, the House of Representatives, they would be the ones who would be most responsive to that. Now, what has become typical in impeachment proceedings is that, first of all, after any member has introduced a resolution, it has gone to the Judiciary Committee. And the Judiciary Committee then conducts an investigation, they debate the evidence, they can interview witnesses, and they write up the articles. Now, this can be a very long, drawn-out process. You may remember with Trump's first impeachment that this committee process, it took, well, I think it took a couple of months, didn't it? And there were multiple committees. There was Foreign Affairs, there was Intelligence, there was House Oversight committees that were investigating it, and it took quite a long time. As I recall recently, some of the Republicans in the House have objected to the way that the article of impeachment was so quickly brought to a vote, that they said, well, you know, we need time to investigate and to talk and to debate and to look at the evidence and all of that. That's just has become normative. Again, it's not required in the Constitution. It just says that the House of Representatives can write up the articles and vote, and a simple majority would send the articles to the Senate. All right. The Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. When sitting for that purpose, they shall be on oath or affirmation. When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside, and no person shall be convicted without the concurrence of 2/3 of the members present. Okay, so let's begin. Oath or affirmation here. That's a nod here to no religious test in the Constitution. Boy, have we been, dissecting Article 1, Section 3 in the news recently here. First of all, again, the trial is going to be in the Senate and not in the House. And again, when we think of the framers and what they were thinking about with the Senate, when they even labeled it the Senate, they were reaching back to their Roman, their ancient Roman history, where the Senate, this was where the aristocrats were found. Even the Latin word for Senate, and I'm probably going to get my Latin wrong here. I think it's senexix. Somebody can correct me on that. And that means old man. So that these were older and wiser folks who were sitting in the Senate. Let's remember, they were not directly elected by the people. So, and they were elected by their state Senate. So we just sort of expected these folks to be a little bit more elite, they were older, they had to be 35 years old. Of course, for us, maybe 35 doesn't seem that old, but it was enough time that you'd lived a little bit of life and you'd collected some wisdom, and you were ready to sit in judgment here. Important point here to stress, and we're going to get into this more when we talk about the framers and why they put the trial into the Senate as opposed to into a court here. This wasn't meant to be a criminal proceeding. The framers knew that this was going to be a political decision, whether or not to remove the president. The Senate, it's a political body, and it lacks any sort of general criminal jurisdiction. The senators aren't expected to have any sort of criminal law competence here. They were just to be the ones who would look at the evidence and they would make a judgment, and that is all, unrestricted really by any law. Okay, this is the question here that has been recently vexing us here about the President of the United States. When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside. Well, that does make sense after all. Ordinarily, the Vice President presides in the Senate, and the Vice President is the one who would most immediately benefit from removal of a president. So we don't want to have him presiding over the trial. Having the Chief Justice there, it didn't necessarily turn it into more of a legal proceeding. And of course, now we've heard that Chief Justice Roberts is not going to be presiding over the trial. But then that begs a question, well, what is Donald Trump? They've said, well, he's not the President of the United States, so the Chief Justice doesn't have to preside. Well, then what is he? Is he a private citizen? Well, private citizens can't be tried. Only presidents and other civil officers can be tried. So anyway, typically, okay, so what kind of a role has the Chief Justice typically played in impeachment trials? Well, it was Chief Justice Chase and Andrew Johnson and Rehnquist for Clinton, and then Roberts for the first trial. And typically these Chief Justices have not played an active role. However, they could. And I've just included here from the Senate manual here that the presiding officer on the trial may rule on all questions of evidence, including but not limited to questions of relevancy, materiality, and redundancy of evidence and incidental questions, which ruling shall stand as the judgment of the Senate unless some member of the Senate shall ask that a formal vote be taken. So that really means that the presiding officer can make a ruling, and if anybody disagrees in the Senate, then they can immediately go to a vote on this, which can certainly slow things down a lot, as we saw the other day. Was that just yesterday? Boy, I tell you, just time flies here. Where the Senator Rand Paul said that wanted to have a vote about whether or not this trial could proceed. So at any point, any senator can stop and say, let's have a vote here. So what actually happens in the trial? As you recall, with Trump's first impeachment, really it only lasted for, I think it lasted for about 2 weeks, and the Republican dominated Senate decided that there would be no witnesses and that there would be no evidence, and it just went to a vote fairly quickly. So anyway, that's a question that is certainly for us to try to figure out as time goes on. Here we've got, I think, a very important question, and that is, seeing that a 2/3 vote is required, if it's clear that you don't have the 2/3 vote, in other words, to get to 2/3, it really does need to be a bipartisan effort. So if it is clear, as it seems to be clear now, that there are not 2/3, I think that's what 17 Republicans need to join the Democrats, then why proceed with the trial? I think to demonstrate, certainly the framers didn't know or didn't believe, they certainly couldn't have predicted how public these trials would be. It could be very important just to go through the evidence, even though it is quite clear at this point what the outcome might be. And then, of course, this is another very vexing question here, is can the trial be held after the president has left office? Now, you might recall that Richard Nixon, that he resigned because it was well understood that if he resigned, that there would be no impeachment. So that's certainly a question here that the Democrats are saying yes, and Republicans are saying largely saying no right now, that you can't hold the trial after the president has left office. And I know that the scholarship on that right now is very much divided. That I've read an awful lot explaining why yes, you can, and no, you can't. For me, when you look at the words here, the words seem really straightforward. The President of the United States, and then we'll see in the next article who else can be tried. So, Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office, honor, trust, or profit under the United States. But the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law. So here we have an explanation here of who can what can happen here. First, we have the vote for removal, and remember that has to hit 2/3. And then there is the vote for disqualification. Now, I find that to be kind of interesting, don't you? That's a second vote. Now, one would think that disqualification would be included in removal. I'm trying to picture somebody who would vote for removal, but then say, oh yeah, I'm not going to vote for future disqualification. I don't know. Are they hoping for redemption? Is this the Christian impulse of forgiveness? I don't know here. But first there is the vote for removal, and then the vote for disqualification. And of course, this is the argument now for why we want to have this second impeachment trial for Donald Trump, because he's already gone. That we want to have the vote for disqualification. Now, in a way, I think that impeachment is a very important protection for the office of the presidency. Now, this is not written anywhere in the Constitution that the president is protected from criminal proceedings. It's been Justice Department policy, I really think, since the 1970s with Richard Nixon. That if you think about it, Congress goes in and out of session. The president never goes out of session. So we can't really imagine, it boggles the mind trying to imagine a president who is under indictment and still carrying on the duties of the president here. I've just written up here some of the powers of the president alone. He's commander-in-chief, commissions officers of the armed forces, grants reprieves and pardons, convenes Congress in special session, receives ambassadors, appoints officials, and most important, takes care that the laws be faithfully executed. Criminal trials are long, drawn-out, complicated procedures, and we couldn't possibly have a president under indictment here. So I So impeachment is very important here, that we can quickly remove a president, and then the criminal proceedings can proceed after that. So let's look next at Article 2, Section 4, Clause 4. The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States. So here we have the list. These are the people who can be impeached, shall be removed from office on impeachment for and convicted of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. So the President, the Vice President, and civil officers. Those are the words, and I just am wondering, where does Donald Trump right now fit in to that, particularly because the Senate has decided that the Chief Justice doesn't have to preside over the trial because they're not trying the President of the United States. So that's a question too complicated for my simple mind. Maybe some of you have a better answer for that. So let's look here and see the definition of these words. Well, treason is clearly defined in the Constitution. In Article 3, they define treason. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort, and 2 witnesses are required here. Bribery, what is, well, as I recall from Donald Trump's first impeachment, there seems to be some confusion about what is bribery. We recall that you know, there was that phone call here where Trump asked the Ukraine president to investigate Biden, and then the question was he using military aid as leverage here? From my understanding, I'm not a lawyer, but from my understanding, that bribery isn't really that complicated, and corrupt solicitation, acceptance, or transfer of value in exchange for official action. That's the definition of bribery. Before we get into high crimes and misdemeanors, I wanted to stop here and see if we have any questions or any comments on anything that we have covered up until now. Meg, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. And you actually have a couple questions in the chat. Get to the chat over here. And the first one, if I can bring it back up, they're blowing up now, is from Mr. Metz, and he says, I always thought that founding fathers meant for impeachment to be used far more often than it has been. That's more of a comment.
Okay, well, we are going to be getting into the framers and what they thought about impeachment. That's an interesting question, and let's visit that again. We'll have to read between the lines here, because they didn't actually say anywhere in their debates about the frequency. So let's hold off on that and see if we, when we look at the debate, what we seem to think they imply.
Okay, and then Noah asks if there were any references to impeachment in the Federalist Papers, and goes on to saying not having the VP preside was that when the Constitution was drafted, the vice president was the runner-up in the election.
Correct. Yes. So the answer to the first question is that yes, impeachment is addressed to in the Federalist Papers. Alexander Hamilton wrote on it. Thank you for asking, because I do have a frame coming up soon where we're going to be looking at what Hamilton said about impeachment. And yes, when the framers wrote the Constitution, the vice president had come in second place in the race for the presidency.
And Bob writes that although Trump equals private citizen or a post-president with benefits of the office. So therefore, he's not just a private citizen and they can try him.
Yeah, and that's obviously what we're debating. We're debating right now. You know, I wonder though this, if this were ever to, and again, I'm not an expert on how exactly a case gets to the Supreme Court, but if, you know, once the trial gets underway, don't you think Trump's lawyers would want to go to the Supreme Court to get a read on this? And it does seem to me that the originalists now on the Supreme Court are going to take a dim view of stretching the definition here, stretching the words here for who can be tried. It says the president, the vice president, and all civil officers of the United States. So I don't know. I think that this is because, as I said, that there's a tremendous amount of scholarship going on both sides of this question. So clearly, it's a matter of opinion here. We are also, I'm going to be talking about that case that maybe you've heard discussed in the news recently, where the Senate did decide that they could have an impeachment trial after somebody has left office.
Okay, and I'm going to read a couple here because they kind of all go together. It says, you know, that this impeachment was largely, the symbolism of it is important, and Nixon was pardoned right away, and Congress impeached Trump when he was still in office. Sending him to the Senate is just a continuation of this process.
Yeah, it is interesting though to emphasize that it was very well understood that Nixon's resignation stopped impeachment in its tracks. And then of course he was pardoned later, but that it was well understood that once he was out of office, he would not be impeached at that time. All right, let's go in and look here at the most vexing part of the impeachment article, and that is other high crimes and misdemeanors. So Clinton here was charged with the high crime of perjury and obstruction of justice. As I recall, with Clinton's impeachment, the question wasn't that, you know, had he committed the crime. He had. Oops, I want to get back there. Didn't mean to move that on. There. But was that crime high enough to justify the removal of a very popular presidency? You recall that his poll ratings were very high during his impeachment. So he was ultimately acquitted of this, I think, because the senators just concluded that lying about a sexual relationship, that didn't rise to the level of needing to undo an election. So let's look here at this question of can you, you know, what are the circumstances here for impeachment here? That drawing I have there on the right was a brawl that broke out in the House of Representatives when they were discussing the impeachment of this Senator William Blount. Thank goodness we haven't gotten to that point yet. So anyway, William Blount, he was a signer of the Constitution, and he had invested in Western lands, and his investments hadn't really panned out, and he'd lost a lot of money, and he was very, very deeply in debt. And it's a very complicated scheme that that he came up with, that he was going to get some Indians and frontiersmen that were going to be invading Spanish Florida and Louisiana, and somehow or another this land would then be given to England. Anyway, very complicated scheme, not important for us. But a letter that was revealing this plan ended up with John Adams here. So the first question that they looked at here was, well, is a senator a civil officer and impeachable? Kind of similar to the question we're looking at today. Has Donald Trump, now that he's no longer president, is he impeachable? Well, the House voted yes. They said that a senator is impeachable. Now it gets sort of complicated. The Senate here voted to expel him, so he was no longer a senator. So they ordered him to appear for trial here. So we've got two questions that were addressed here. First of all, is a senator a civil officer? And then secondly, once he is out of the Senate, could he be tried? And so they said, yes, he needed to appear for trial here. After some kind of long drawn out debates here, Vice President Thomas Jefferson, he was presiding over the trial here, dismissed the case. Unfortunately for us, it's a little bit confusing about why they dismissed the case. The record isn't really clear. Did they dismiss the case because a senator is not a civil officer and therefore not impeachable, or did they dismiss it because he'd already left? So the record isn't really clear. We don't really have a clear precedent, but we do see here the first time that this House and the Senate did address these difficult questions. All righty. So now we're going to look at this question of can you impeach somebody after they have left office? And oh my heavens, how often do you hear arcane cases from 1876 being discussed on the news? And I've heard this one brought up a couple of times recently. This was Secretary of War William Belknap here. He was living a very extravagant lifestyle, and people wondered how he was able to be spending so much money when he wasn't earning very much money. And it soon became clear that he was involved in quite a few corrupt activities. And we're talking the Grant administration here. So for his corrupt activities to have considered to be beyond the pale, then they must have been pretty egregious here. So the story goes that Belknap, just in moments before the House could vote on his article of impeachment, he ran to the White House, and with tears running down his face, he tendered his resignation to Grant, and there he is with Grant holding his hand, and he's wiping the tears from his face. So he has resigned. He is no longer a civil officer. So can the trial proceed? The Senate did vote that it retained the ability to hold the trial even over former government officials. So here we have the precedent that many of us might be looking for. And they said in the Senate that Belknap should not be allowed to escape from justice simply by resigning his office. And that is, of course, what we hear being echoed today, that Trump should not be allowed to escape from the consequences of his behavior simply by resigning. And of course, I've heard a lot of the catastrophizing argument here. Well, a president could do just about anything, and then he could resign and he could avoid paying the consequences. Now, the fact that the Senate voted on this once doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be any kind of an important precedence. This isn't a ruling by the Supreme Court, after all, where precedence carries a lot more weight. This was one Senate, one circumstance that decided that you could impeach somebody after they left office. Are there any questions now, Meg? Can you see any more questions before I move on?
There are many comments. Most relevant to this is Trump didn't resign. He was defeated in an election. Did Belknap argue that the Senate and not the judiciary was the proper arbiter of the role?
No, that wasn't that wasn't the question here. That remember, one of the reasons why we have impeachment is so that once out of office, that this person then can face the criminal, any sort of criminal proceedings. So that wasn't part of the argument that it shouldn't be in the Senate.
And they want to know about 2/3 of those present. Does that mean if, like, all the Republicans didn't show up, 2/3 of the Democrats could then convict him?
That's a really good question here. That's a really good question. I mean, it says that the Senate, I'm assuming that would be the full Senate. That's a really good question. Does somebody have a better answer for that? Maybe somebody has a better answer. They could jump in. That seems pretty obvious, though, that it has to be the full Senate. But I don't know. Any other questions there, Meg?
Panaria has a raised hand. Are you willing to take a raised hand question?
Sure. Yeah.
Hold on a second. I have to get to that.
By the way, the vote in the Senate here, it did fall short of the 2/3 vote that was required. So he was acquitted.
Okay, Panaria, if you have a question, if you could unmute yourself, or if you've passed your question, just say no.
I hit the wrong button. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay then.
My question, what I have heard, and I would assume there's a quorum for the Senate, that as long as you hit the quorum, it's only 2/3 of who is there. I've heard this talked about a lot.
Ah, okay.
So if the Republicans who don't want to be on the record for voting or not voting, if they stay home, then it's 2/3 of whoever sits there, as long as it has the quorum. And I don't know about what the quorum is. But my question that I had before was that since Clinton went to court and said, look, I'm too busy to deal with this with all this legal stuff. And the court said, no, you're not busy enough. Yeah, you can continue and you can still go to court, which is what you had said before, that they shouldn't be bothered to go to court since they're in control of all that stuff. So why didn't it work for Clinton when he was going to court for all that stuff during Cox investigation?
Well, he wasn't, to obviously he couldn't avoid the impeachment trial here. And there was then, all of the evidence that was collected during the Starr investigation that you know, that he had to give these depositions and he had to participate in those investigations. So, you know, again, this is just such a really murky question here, not in the Constitution, that that typically, you know, we want the office of the presidency to continue, but on the other hand, we don't want him to be you know, be safe from any sort of prosecution. And again, what would be important here is that if there was a really complicated sort of criminal proceeding, that there could be impeachment so that the office of the presidency would be avoided. I think the point that you're getting at is that it's really complicated with how much protection a president has while being in office.
Yes, it seems like there's two rules, one for the Democrats and one for the Republicans.
By the way, the comment that you just said about the quorum, now the Senate the other day, they were all sworn in as jurors. And to the best of my understanding, that all of the senators were sworn in. And so once sworn in as a juror, seems to me that they are going to be required to show up, as any juror would be required to show up when he was serving on a jury. But that's a really interesting idea. If some of because certainly I think that the other day when a lot of the Republicans voted on the constitutionality of this trial, that was a really kind of easy way out, don't you think?
Yes.
That they didn't actually have to speak out on how objectionable, if not criminal, that Trump's behavior was. They could say, well, this is just not a constitutional procedure.
Yes, yes.
Really, really interesting. Anyway, I had planned on later on talking about these early applications of impeachment, but because it is so relevant to the questions that we're seeing in the news today, I thought that I would bring these up right here. So anyway, let's look here at the Constitutional Convention and the issue of impeachment, and maybe this can help us answer some of these questions about, you know, why is there impeachment, what is it, and you know, and where does it happen? Why is it in the Senate and not in the courts? So when we look here at the framers, we know that when they were putting together our Constitution, they had two very important models. They had the British system, and then they also had state constitutions. Now, impeachment was part of the British system. Now, you can't impeach the monarch. However, you can certainly be limiting the power of the monarch by impeaching his ministers. So beginning with, I think, the 1300s, and then more frequently up through the 17th century, impeachment was a fairly common practice. Today in England, that impeachment has become pretty much obsolete. They have other ways of quickly removing unpopular leaders. They don't need to go through this impeachment process, but it has not been officially abandoned here. The state constitutions that the framers looked at, first of all, New York, they did have an impeachment provision for their governors for mal and corrupt conduct, and the very important Massachusetts Constitution that was impeachment for misconduct and maladministration. So September 8th, 1787, this is pretty late into the summer. of the Constitutional Convention that the framers are finally getting around to clarifying Article 2 provisions and the issue of impeachment. So this resolution was brought up for debate to be removable on impeachment and conviction for malpractice or neglect of duty, that the president could be removed for malpractice or neglect of duty. There was immediately a move made by one of the delegates that should be struck out. We don't need an impeachment provision in the Constitution. And he said that the executive will be too dependent on those who have the power to impeach. It will be held as a rod over the executive, and by that means destroy his independence. You know, the framers were very worried about this idea of encroachment, the way that one of the branches of government would encroach upon the powers of another. They predicted, interestingly enough, that it was going to be Congress. Congress was going to be the branch of government that would grow in power and would encroach upon the others. They did not predict that the powers of the presidency would grow to the degree that it has today. And the point was also made that, you know, a bad president simply won't get reelected. You know, we don't need to you know, worry about impeachment. At this point, our very own George Mason and Ben Franklin spoke up. George Mason says that no point is of more importance than impeachment. Shall any man be above justice? Above all, shall that man be above it who can commit the most extensive injustice here? And I think certainly we hear echoes of that argument today here, that the president is so powerful that we need to have a mechanism where he can be held accountable for his deeds. Now, at this point, Ben Franklin spoke up. Franklin didn't actually attend too many days of the convention. His health was very poor, but he said, "What was the practice before in cases where the chief magistrate rendered himself obnoxious? Why, recourse was had to assassination, in which he was not only deprived of his life, but of the opportunity of vindicating his character." Now, in Madison's notes, he does not say whether or not the delegates broke out in laughter after Franklin said this. I think we can assume that he meant this in humor, because Franklin could oftentimes shift the tone of an argument by using his humor. And so from that point on, it was like, well, okay, we're not going to be striking it out, but we're going to have impeachment there, but we need to maybe work on the words a little bit. After Franklin spoke, James Madison spoke. James Madison, of course, kept the very extensive notes, the only real extensive record that we have about what happened during the convention. And Madison didn't really speak an awful lot in the convention. There are many delegates who spoke much more than he did, but occasionally he would put down his pen and he would speak. And generally when he did speak, it would oftentimes shift the argument and was considered to be very profound what he had to say. And so I've included here a very extensive passage here. And this is James Madison speaking of himself in the third person as he did. James Madison thought it indispensable that some provision should be made for defending the community against the incapacity, negligence, or perfidy of the chief magistrate. The limitation of the period of his service was not sufficient security. He might pervert his administration into a scheme of peculation or oppression. He might betray his trust to foreign powers. The case of the executive was very distinguishable from that of the legislature. If one or few members only should be seduced, the soundness of the remaining members would maintain the integrity and fidelity of the body. In the case of the executive, which was to be administered by a single man, loss of capacity or corruption might be fatal to the republic. And here again, he is saying how important it is that we have some method of immediately removing a president who has gone bad. Pervert his administration into a scheme of peculation or oppression. So we continue here with the argument. So we're going to have an impeachment clause. That argument's been put to rest here. And so now we pick up this very sticky question about, well, what will be the grounds for impeachment here? And Gouverneur Morris here, he spoke more than any other of the representatives, of the delegates here in the convention. And he said that impeachment for treachery, corrupting his electors, and incapacity. He should be punished not as a man, but as an officer, and punished only by degradation from his office. A very important point I think Morris is making here. He's saying that the important thing here is that the president be removed from office, not that we punish this individual man for any sort of corrupt behavior. What we're doing here is we are protecting the office for treachery, for corrupting those folks who elected him, or really any kind of incapacity here. So in a way, I think we are beginning to look at the issue of how bad does a president need to be in order to face impeachment. So there was a vote, there was consensus here on the wording. It begins that levying war against the United States, adhering to the enemies of the United States, would be the definition of treason. That would be impeachable, and we would need at least 2 witnesses needed to convict. So that made its way into the finished product pretty much unchanged. And then bribery. Now, they didn't bother anywhere in the Constitution to define bribery. Most of them were lawyers, so perhaps they just assumed that everybody knows what bribery means. And then, of course, George Mason spoke up, and he said, you know, treason and bribery is really too limited. Says that will not reach many great and dangerous offenses, because attempts to subvert the Constitution may not be treason. Say a president during a national crisis could go on vacation. That's not bribery or treason, but that's really bad behavior. So then George Mason, he said, let's say treason, bribery, and maladministration. And of course, maladministration, that's a pretty loose definition here. Let's add maladministration. That was tossed about in by the delegates, and they came to the conclusion that maladministration, that's a little bit too vague. And so they rejected that. And they again said, you know, just a guy who's just kind of bad at his job. Well, we've got election every 4 years. and he's just not going to be reelected. So we don't have to worry about that. And then I guess we can thank George Mason, our very own George Mason, for those for that phrase, high crimes and misdemeanors. And there was a vote taken, and that's why we have it in the Constitution, high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, for us today, replacing maladministration with high crimes and misdemeanors, it might not make it much clearer. However, I do think for the framers that they did understand what high crimes and misdemeanors meant. So we are asking ourselves today, well, it says high crimes and misdemeanors. Does that mean it has to be a high misdemeanor? High crimes and misdemeanors, high crimes and a high misdemeanor? And does the misdemeanor need to be a crime? Well, first of all, we have, we'll look at the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation, we did have that word misdemeanor, and that was in the extradition clause. If any person guilty of or charged with treason, felony, or other high misdemeanor in any state shall flee from justice, blah, 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 they could be extradited to the other state. In that usage there, it does appear that a high misdemeanor is sort of at the level of a criminal behavior. Nonetheless, though, I think when we look at the education and the understanding of our 18th century framers, that although we might not be familiar with the term of misdemeanor, high crimes and misdemeanors, they were familiar with the phrase. And I think that they didn't debate it anymore in the convention, because they all kind of nodded their head and they said, yeah, we know what that means here. Rufus King, he was a delegate from Massachusetts. He said it was the intention and honest desire of the convention to use those expressions that were most easy to be understood and least equivocal in their meaning. So again, the education of the framers here. Most of them were lawyers. Remember that they were very well versed in English law, where committing a misdemeanor was very common in impeachments, which was probably why they were very comfortable with putting it in our Constitution. That it generally described charges that tended to be more political than criminal in nature. It could just simply describe negligence while in office, or behaving in an inappropriate manner while in office. That would be considered to be a misdemeanor that would be an impeachable offense. An example from English law is that advising the king to grant liberties and privilege to certain persons to the hindrance of the due execution of the laws. That would be considered to be an impeachable offense. That would be under the category of misdemeanor. Or else procuring offices for persons who were unfit and unworthy of them, or squandering the public treasure here, misspending. None of these are crimes, but they would be misdemeanors. They would be an impeachable offense. Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England. James Madison said, this is a book which is in every man's hand. I don't know about you, but it's not a book in my hand. But certainly the well-schooled lawyers of the day would be very familiar with Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England. This is what they read in preparation for being a lawyer. And in Blackstone's Commentaries, he defined a high misdemeanor. First and principal one is the maladministration of such high offices or are in public trust and employment. This is usually punished by the method of parliamentary impeachment, wherein such penalties short of death are inflicted as to the wisdom of the House appears. So I'm reminded here when he says it's just according to the wisdom of the House appears. I think it was Gerald Ford who said, you know, an impeachable offense is anything that the Congress says that it is. And in a way, I think we have in Blackstone saying, you know what, an impeachable offense is what the House of Peers says that it is, shall seem proper, consisting usually of banishment, imprisonment, fines, or perpetual disability here. So the framers seem to understand that a high crime and misdemeanor didn't necessarily be criminal. It was just bad behavior while in office that in the wisdom of those looking at the evidence have decided that this is an offense worthy of removal from office. Do you want to take any questions here, Meg? We're about what 15 minutes from the end, so I don't want to be.
Okay, you have a couple of raised hand questions and you have several in the chat. Most common theme seems to be Trump was impeached while he was still president. Does that not mean the trial should go on?
Yeah. Good question.
And a lot of the others are on the two-thirds vote. And it talks about also incapacitation of senators not being able to be present, so they aren't counted against the 2/3. So how would everybody sworn then be required to vote?
Right. So, and again, that would have been really interesting if some of the Republican senators had just said they were too busy and could have avoided the whole process. Interesting. I wonder why they didn't opt for that. Interesting.
The protocol log is where.
And once again, do you want to take raised hands questions?
Mm-hmm. Meg,
Okay.
do you hear that other voice? I hear another voice coming through my computer. Like
I'm sorry, that's my husband in a meeting, and that's why I usually stay on mute except when I'm talking to you.
Okay.
So, and I will go back on mute shortly. So, Mr. Metz, if you have a question, please go ahead, and I'm going to mute myself.
Yes. Just moves from one ambiguity to another one. What is an enemy?
Oh, you're talking about treason.
An enemy, but what is an enemy?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And so, are you saying that by Trump in some way colluding with these encouraging the insurrectionists, certainly they should be considered enemies of the state? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I was actually thinking of Russia, but the insurrectionists certainly are also what I would consider enemies, as was Iran in the Reagan administration.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's that the story is yet to be told about Trump's relationship with Putin. I think we all remember that horrible news conference where Trump stood next to Putin and said, I believe this man's word over my own intelligence agencies. Was that a treasonable offense? There were certainly more than 2 witnesses to that. So, yeah, good point. Meg, do you have another question there? Oh. The glitches of Zoom.
I'm looking. Let me hold on a second while I look back through my chat.
Steve Greenhouse is up.
Yes.
I think I'm muted. These questions were asked earlier, but I never heard an answer, and they're really important to what's going on now. Where did you get that a separate vote is required for ineligibility to hold future offices, and that only a majority vote is required, not 2/3 for that?
That's a good point, because that's, I think, just become the interpretation. But the Constitution just says that that there will be a vote for removal, and then it doesn't actually say a second vote with a simple majority. It doesn't actually say those words, but that's just become the normative practice, that that there are two separate votes.
Well, what do you mean by normative? Where does that come from?
I just, well, a normative practice is just what people have come to expect, the way it's been interpreted. I don't know, who first thought that one up, but it's not in the Constitution. That's a really good point.
Well, I hope you're right, because I think it's going to come down to that. They'll never get 2/3 for removal, but they may get a majority for ineligibility for future office. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. Could they
Oh.
go ahead and have the vote for ineligibility? Because it seems to be that we all sort of are expecting it, that first we have the vote for removal, and then we have the vote for ineligibility.
So would the vote for removal have to be 2/3 before they could then vote for?
Yes, that's in the Constitution, that removal has to be 2/3 vote.
But would they have to pass that one before they could pass the majority vote?
Well, like
They
I
have to
said,
find-
that seems to be what the normative practice has become, that we expect that first there is the 2/3 vote for removal, and then there is a vote to block him from serving in office again. But those words specifically are not in the Constitution, that first the vote for removal and then the vote to prevent him from running for office again. Those words themselves aren't in the Constitution.
I think this is going to be a hornet's nest.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think what the Democrats want to accomplish is to make him ineligible to ever hold office again. They know removal is a moot point.
Right.
And if they could get that out of it, it would be worthwhile.
Yes, and I think that in addition to wanting to ban him from ever getting into the presidency again, is that they also do want to have the presentation of evidence, that they want to show the ways in which those folks that stormed the Capitol were directly responding to his words, that they want to be able to present that to the American people. Don't you think that they really want to be speaking to the American people? Not necessarily to the Republicans in the Senate who've already made up their mind about it.
Yeah, I have another point, which is the Senate is the jury, right? But in this case, the senators, many of them are also witnesses.
Yes.
And is that problematic?
That's the issue with the trial being in the Senate, that typical rules of evidence and procedures that might apply in a criminal case in a courtroom, they don't apply to the Senate. That any of these questions that come up, that the Senate will just simply take a vote on it. About, should this person be allowed to speak? Is this evidence, you know, that they are judge, they are jury, they are making all of the determinations about how the trial should proceed.
And this keeps coming up, so I'm going to ask it one more time. If the president is acquitted, can he still be banned from holding future office? So if you don't get that 2/3, can they go on then and ban him from office?
You know, that's such a good question, because it doesn't say in the Constitution. It just says that there will be, you know, the 2/3 vote to remove him from office, and there will be a vote to ban him from office. It doesn't clearly say that it has to go in order like that.
Well, the reason I'm having problems with this is if it was a regular trial and they were found not guilty, you could not then decide to punish them.
Right. Well, and that's because it's not a regular trial.
That's why this is all in upheaval.
Right.
And people keep pointing out also that Hastings of Florida was impeached and removed as a federal judge and is now a congressman and not disqualified.
Right.
And Paul Howard wants to know, are we going to get to Andrew Johnson?
Oh, yes. We've got 4 sessions. We'll get to Andrew Johnson. I did feel as though, you know, because this is just so, you know, front and center right now, this issue of impeachment and these questions. And, you know, we're going to see with Andrew Johnson that these were the questions that were there. What is an impeachable offense here? How exactly does the trial proceed in the Senate? How is it organized? All of those questions were there with Andrew Johnson. And then we just have a few more minutes. So here, just to kind of wrap up, I think the most important thing we're going to see with Andrew Johnson, as we've seen with all of the other impeachments, is that you can't take one event, such as to understand Trump's first impeachment. You can't take just the transcript of that phone call and his second impeachment, his January 6th speech. You have to understand impeachment within the context of the presidency. And with Andrew Johnson, it wasn't just his violation of this Tenure of Office Act here, that his impeachment happened within a much broader historic context. And I think that that's, of course, something, you know, really, really important. It's because of the last 4 years of Donald Trump's presidency. There are many folks who just really, really need to see something happen, just like with Andrew Johnson, that there were so many folks who were so appalled by his policies that they thought something had to happen. And so they came up with this impeachment here. May or may not have been the best instrument at that time, just like today we are wondering about the impeachment of Trump. Is impeachment the proper instrument to be used at this time? Do we have I don't know, my watch says we have a few more minutes. Just to wrap up, does anybody have any more questions or issues? And we will proceed.
People are still talking about the Judge Hastings, and that keeps coming up as precedent. And it was pointed out that he was granted a full pardon by President Clinton, even though he was tried and convicted as well as impeached.
Yeah. Well, that pardon power is pretty extensive, isn't it?
And does not violating an oath of office by refusing to faithfully execute the laws constitute a high crime and misdemeanor?
Well, that's of course into, this whole other issue here of the power of the presidency and how it has evolved over time. That presidents are just operating with so much discretion when it comes to faithfully executing the laws, that presidents are establishing policy through executive orders outside of any laws that have been passed. And then they are, of course, exercising so much discretion when it comes to how they will implement the laws, that they are moving funds around, or else just choosing to ignore certain provisions or of laws to not get around to executing certain laws by having signing statements where they are saying, this is how I'm interpreting this law and this is how I'm planning on implementing it. Yeah, that should certainly be an impeachable offense, shouldn't it? Not faithfully executing the laws.
Okay, do you have any last thoughts that you want to wrap up? Otherwise, we will be back again next Wednesday.
You know what? I was going to talk about Alexander Hamilton, but I think that's better to start our next session with that, to see what did the brilliant Hamilton have to say about impeachment.
Okay, so that's where we will pick up next week. And I thank everyone for their questions. And I got one that's shouting at me in all caps, why wasn't the term felony used? A felony, at least today, is much more serious than a misdemeanor.
Oh, you mean why the framers? Well, because I think they didn't want to set the bar too high for an impeachable offense. That they didn't want it didn't need to be a criminal behavior. They really viewed it as just a very, sort of profound negligence or misbehavior.
Okay, so next week with Alexander Hamilton, Wednesday, 11:50. Anything else?
I'll see you then.
All right, thank you so much. And I'm going to end this now for everyone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's fun. Bye, everybody. See you next week.